Dr. Elizabeth Lucas. Greetings from Portugal. Good morning, Dr. TPS. Greetings. It's a great pleasure to be here. It's a great honor to be invited to be here, to share ideas, to share thoughts, to be amongst esteemed colleagues, esteemed friends. It's always great to create opportunities to dialogue, to create networking opportunities, because it's by sharing that we can grow. And if we cannot share, then our most important goal, that is education, cannot grow as well, because education needs to be shared. Knowledge needs to be shared. So, my dear friends, again, it's a great pleasure and a great honor to be here. So I would like to share a presentation. Is it possible to share? Yes, I think so. So, my friends, communication in relationships, not just in relationship, but in relationships. So I would like to invite you all to a journey regarding, first of all, the understanding of a concept that is a quite complex concept, that is communication. And we'll try to establish some frontiers regarding this concept, communication, and separate communication from information. And this is our goal number one. Our goal number two will be to understand how communication is truly the basis for a good relationship. A good relationship at home, a good relationship with our friends, with our colleagues, in our job, in our organization, in the labor market. So in all different places where communication is absolutely vital. So let us begin by sharing a thought by George Bernard Shaw. And according to George Bernard Shaw, the single biggest problem with communication is the illusion that it has taken place. So what does Mr. George Bernard Shaw tells us when he thinks about communication? Well, he's sharing some of the most important frontiers to understand the concept. Perhaps when we are trying to communicate, we establish priorities, we establish goals, we establish objectives, we define the audience, we try to know the audience, the characteristics of each and everyone who is listening to us. We try to define the best strategies. We try to define the best content, the best syllabus. And this is our task. But even so, sometimes we forget that communication works both ways, both sides. So this is just one side of the question. The other side of the question is the side of the listener. And sometimes we are communicating, or we think we are communicating, but we are just sharing information. And by sharing information, this does not mean that we are creating real communication, because we can share, we can deliver, but our listener may not be able to understand, to decode, to assimilate, to integrate what we are saying, what kind of information we are sharing. So, my dear friends, this is the first barrier we have to overcome. The complex of the mixture of the possibilities we have regarding communication is so thick. We have so different layers of information when we are working with communication that sometimes we think we are communicating, but we are just sharing information. And communication is vital for us all nowadays, not just at home, not just with our friends, but at work as well. So when we think what's the most important skill you need to have at your job on a day-to-day basis, the answer is quite obvious. Communication skills with 50%. And then we have objective prioritization skills, people management skills, organization skills, technical skills, design skills, and so on. But the number one is communication. So this is vital in all corporations. This is vital in all organizations. This is vital in our schools, in our universities. Again, this is vital in our lives. So this is why communication is truly the basis to begin a good relationship. And indeed, a good relationship starts with good communication. And good communication is not just information. It's information, but it's also managing different techniques that help us to create and to share this information with our audience. So when we think about how can I improve my communication skills, for example, so you may ask 5 very important questions. For example, what are the best channels to use to get information across? So am I using the best channels? Of course, first of all, I have to define my target, my audience. Who is my audience? What characteristics does my audience have? Is my audience connected? Is my audience using internet, for example? What devices do they use? Or they don't use devices at all. So this means that we may have an extraordinary piece of information to share, but we cannot share because we cannot share the same platform, for example, or we do not have connectivity, for example. And we saw this during the pandemic. We saw this during the COVID-19 crisis. So we didn't have technology to help all countries to overcome difficulties. This is why one of the most important lessons that we have learned from the COVID-19 experience is that we have to address education as our #1 priority. And with education is technology. So we need EdTech. Second, are you communicating in a clear, open, passionate, and humble way? Because communication is not just information, as I said before. It's all about interpersonal skills. It's about empathy. It's about creating a bond, a connection between we, while speaking, while addressing the audience, and the audience who is receiving. But they're not passive. This is not a passive relationship. So we have feedback. We need feedback from the audience. And if we don't have feedback from the audience, then again, there is no communication at all. There is just information sharing. Number three, how does the way you communicate make those around you feel? This is very important, my friends, because again, it's all about feelings. It's all about creating empathy. So communication has a goal to establish a connection. But this connection is established through emotions, through feelings. And if we don't put together information, feelings, virtues, principles, then we don't have a clear picture, a profound picture, a perfect picture about what we are going to share. Question number 4, are you being human? This is an outstanding question. So, my dear friends, when we communicate, are we being human? Well, nowadays we are discussing a lot about artificial intelligence. We are discussing a lot about ChatGPT and other technologies that are all around us. And of course, we cannot ignore them because they are here to stay. But the most important thing is that we, as humans, we are not machines. And we have feelings, we have virtues, we have principles. And when we communicate, we use all this to establish a bond with the audience. Whatever the audience may be, because we are talking about a professional audience or our family, our friends, but we have to be human. And question number 5, if someone communicated to you in the same way you are communicating to others, what impact would it have? So again, we have to think that communication is all about establishing this liaison between the person who is talking, who is speaking, and the person who is listening. But as I said before, this is not a passive way. This is not just a one-way communication opportunity. And either you get it, either you don't. No, not at all. To communicate, we must change the 2 focus points of this process. So the one who is sharing will be the one who is receiving in a second phase, and the opposite. So this is why communication without feedback is not communication at all. And sometimes I think we all try to communicate better, and we all try to get our message delivered, but sometimes we have barriers to effective communication. Well, barriers that are connected to us, that are connected with the tools, with the platforms, with the means we use. And sometimes these barriers are connected with the audience. So we have a lot of barriers. So when we think about the most important barriers, for example, in our society, we can include organizational barriers, cultural barriers, language barriers, channel barriers, interpersonal barriers, individual, attitudinal, listening, barriers while speaking, and so on. These are the common barriers that I would like to highlight. So these barriers, my dear friends, are truly a great challenge for us. Because again, we might have prepared an extraordinary communication. We might have prepared an extraordinary set of topics to share. But If we lack, for example, a cultural bond, if we lack a language bond, if we lack the proper channel, if we have interpersonal barriers, then something is about to fail. So when we communicate, we have to think, what barriers am I going to face? I have to be prepared. Sometimes we can be prepared and something happens during the communication process, of course. So this is why a very important characteristic is that we have to be flexible. We have to adapt. And sometimes we are presenting, for example, and we have a problem with our computer, we have a problem with our platform, we have a problem with our PowerPoint, with our Prezi, with the software we are using. We have a problem with the audience, for example. We have to be prepared. The one who is communicating must be always prepared because barriers are always there. So how to overcome these barriers? So let us highlight some tips. From 1 to 9, make your ideas clear before communicating. Ensure the time of your communication is good. Use a language your receiver can understand. Make your message to the point and short, checking if the other person has understood your message. So this is why feedback is so important. Take care of your body language, tone, and content of the message. Listen before you speak again. Do not interrupt when someone else is speaking. Make your message judgment-free. So these 9 ways to overcome the barriers to effective communication can help us a lot, not just when we are preparing, but also when we are communicating. They are also important if we get some feedback from the audience, from the listener, from the receiver, that is not quite positive. So we have to understand this may happen. We have to be prepared. And of course, how to manage communication barriers. So first of all, I would like to say, my dear friends, that we have to identify the communication barriers we are facing. So once you do this, it will be easier to tackle them. So first of all, we have to try to understand what are the barriers, where are the barriers, how am I going to deal with these barriers? Second, learn about different cultural norms and customs, because sometimes cultural differences may create some problems, may create some barriers. And sometimes we are not aware of these cultural barriers. So when we are sharing some information, we are trying to communicate, we can create a problem, but we do not know that we are creating a problem because there is a cultural difference. So try to understand the cultural differences before you communicate. This, of course, is in terms of verbal and non-verbal language use. So once you do, you'll decrease the chances of misunderstandings and confusion. Number 3, identify your assumptions, stereotypes, biases, and prejudice. Once you do this, you'll be able to work on overcoming them. Sometimes our communication has some characteristics that for us are quite innocent. For example, they're not important for us, but they are important for our listener. They are very important to our audience. So we have, again, to be prepared. We have to think about the audience. What am I going to say will affect my audience in a way? Is it going to be the right way? Am I going to use the right words? May I use this word, for example? May I use this image, for example? May I use this video, for example? Are they appropriate? These are some questions that we have to ask. And of course, pick an appropriate official team language. So in case the members of the team have different mother tongues. Nowadays, we are working with colleagues from different countries, from different continents, and this is awesome. This is outstanding. This is great. But of course, this is also a challenge for us. So when we are dealing with a multicultural team, we have to understand that our communication has an audience that is plural. So it's not just one person with a set of characteristics. We have different persons with different characteristics. So we have to think about this very interesting but challenging opportunity to create bonds between different cultures, between our colleagues at work, for example. But we have to understand if they have different characteristics, if they belong to different cultures, we must be prepared to share the correct information and also to convey this information with the right context. Because sometimes, my friends, we don't even know that we are facing a barrier. Sometimes, my dear friends, we are facing barriers that we think that they might be there, but we are not sure. And sometimes we really understand there is a barrier. So what can we do? So the answer is quite obvious, my friends. First of all, we have to pay attention to our listener, to our receiver, and we have to pay attention to the tools that we use to communicate. Because even if we have the most important tools, the best technology, my friends, something may happen that is not in our hands. So we are truly dealing with barriers to effective communication, and sometimes we are not aware of that. For example, let us think about emojis. And I'm sure we all use emojis on a daily basis. So, for example, when we think about the use of one emoji, but with different smartphone platforms, what we get is different emotions. This happens because different platforms, different smartphones are, of course, different, and they have different characteristics. For example, if you send the Apple emoji to a Google Nexus, they'll see the Google emoji and vice versa. So in a scale from negative, neutral, and positive, the Apple emoji can be detected and interpreted with Microsoft, Samsung, LG, Google, whatever. What I'm trying to say is that sometimes the same message can be understood differently by our audience. It's not our fault. It's because of the tools. It's because of the platforms we use. And we have to check this out. We have to be prepared. This is why when we prepare the communication, then we have to think about the tools, because sometimes the tools can be a barrier to our communication. And of course, then we have perceptions. Then we have points of view. Then we have the characteristics of our listeners. For example, on our left, for us, well, we may say it's quite obvious that we can see, or it's quite obvious that we can see two faces. Well, what is it, my friends? Is it a cup or two faces? Well, the problem is that for us, it's quite obvious that it's a cup. But for our audience, it might be quite obvious that I'm talking about two persons. So when we think about language, symbols, signals, we have also to analyze the distinction that our audience may establish when they are decoding the information. For example, on your right, what do you see, my friends? Do you see a tree? For example, I might be seeing a tree. I can see a tree. Do you see a tree? Well, some of you may think, no, it's not a tree. Again, I can see two persons. So again, we are talking about different points of view, different perceptions. And if I'm describing a tree and my communication is all about this tree, my communication is about to fail because my audience cannot see the tree. My audience is only seeing two persons. So points of view, different perspectives may really be a great barrier, a great challenge, and they might even destroy our communication. So this is why we have to think that the essence, and now I'm quoting Michael P. Nichols, the essence of good listening is empathy, which can be achieved only by suspending our preoccupation with ourselves and entering into the experience of another person. Part intuition and part effort, it's the stuff of human connection. And the stuff of human connection is something that we cannot truly define. But if I could choose an image to define this connection, then perhaps the image you have on your right is a very interesting image. This defines communication. When we are truly sharing something that belongs to us and that is going to belong to the others. You can see that we have birds flying from one tree to another, from one person to another. Imagine those birds are ideas. Imagine those birds are concepts. Imagine those birds are words. Imagine those birds are feelings. So, my friends, if these birds are flying from one person to another, then we have communication. Because we have communication, we are sharing, we are creating, and we are creating this bond, this stuff of human connection. This is truly communication. So, again, even when we think that we are, well, creating a good presentation, sometimes the biggest communication problem is we do not listen to understand, we listen to reply. And this really happens, well, at home, with our friends, with our colleagues, at school, at work. Sometimes we listen to reply. So I'm just paying attention. I'm just listening to that question so that I can reply. But did I understand the question? Did I understand the meaning of the question? And that is the point. So this is why we need essential communication skills. For example, persuasion, effective listening, professional language, empathy, and mirroring. This is very important, mirroring, personalization, accurate information giving, transparency and honesty, and positive body language. So these are essential communication skills that we have to use, whatever the context, whatever the audience, and whatever the listener or the receiver. Because, again, question number one, who is our listener? And this question defines all our answers. This question defines the effective use of communication skills, because we may have these communication skills, but sometimes we do not use these communication skills properly. When and why? With written communication, with non-verbal communication, with presentation skills, compassion, cultural awareness, personal connections, trust, verbal communication, active listening. And active listening is so important, my friends. It's so important. It's not just receiving the information, receiving data. Is being active when receiving this information. Is being active when we are listening. That's the difference. Am I listening to the question to reply, or am I listening to the question to understand the question? So these communication skills, my friends, include, as I said before, presentation skills, negotiation skills, not just at work, but also at home, business writing skills, influential skills, cross-cultural communication. And this is vital for us nowadays because we are living in a cross-cultural society. Win-win conversations. When we are communicating, when we are creating a dialogue, well, our aim is not to win. Our aim is to get a win-win situation. This means we all win. The one who is sharing, the one who is receiving, we all win. This is a win-win conversation. When we are selling skills, and then we have teamwork, and how to create good teamwork with communication skills, again. So communication is important in your company, for example. Let me just highlight 8 ideas from this Business Communication Essentials, a skills-based approach by Cortland Beauvais and John V. Thill. So communication is important to your company because important community ties are created, opportunities to influence may arise, productivity and problem solving will be challenges truly connected with your communication skills. We will have improved financial results, warning of potential problems. Potential problems will be detected, will be faced, will be dealt with. We'll have better decision making. We'll have persuasive marketing messages. We'll have better employee engagement and satisfaction and lower employee turnover. So communication is very important at work. And benefits of effective communication are, of course, another layer of understanding communication. For example, easier and better problem solving. So if we have a good and effective communication, it's easier for us to get problems solved with our colleagues, with our friends, in our corporation, at work. It's easier and better to make decisions with good and effective communication. Good and effective communication affects decision making. better business relationships, increased engagement, improved productivity, better team culture. So these are extraordinary benefits of effective communication. And effective communication can be summarized, for example, with the so-called 7 C's of effective communication. So clear, concise, concrete, correct, coherent, complete, and courteous. So be clear about the goal and purpose of your message. Keep to the point and keep your message short and simple. Be clear, not fuzzy. Provide detail, but not too much detail. Make sure your message is accurate and grammatically correct. Make sure your message flows well and laid out logically. Ensure the recipient has everything they need to understand. Your message should be polite, friendly, professional, and open. Because these characteristics, these 7 C's, are connected, for example, with these 5 ways to boost digital workplace productivity with internal communications. So communication is extraordinary, and communication is vital, not just for internal communication, but also for external communication. So let us take a look at these 5 ways. So share knowledge. People need to be able to actively share knowledge across the whole organization. Encourage disagreement. Help people have honest discussions and introduce healthy levels of disagreement. This is important in teamwork. Facilitate innovation. Internal communication enables employees to brainstorm with each other, engage employees. One simple way to improve employee engagement is to initiate employee advocacy. Focus on problem solving. Good communication culture nurtures a problem-solving mentality. So we can really boost our corporation, we can really boost our communication, we can really boost teamwork. For example, 85% of employees are most motivated when management regularly updates them on company news. This is why internal communication is so important. So this is why, for example, 70% of corporate errors are due to poor communication, according to research. So again, communication is one of the most important pillars we have at work in our corporations. And again, 96% of business leaders agree that effective communication is essential for delivering the business results expected of their team in the coming year. But nearly 3 in 4, this means 74%, say their company underestimates the cost of poor communication. So this means, my dear friends, that we all recognize the importance of communication at work, but not all of us recognize the foundational relevance of communication for our corporations. So we should have here not just 96%, we should have here 100%. So of course, when we have active communication, effective communication, we have good outcomes. For example, for business leaders, we have increased productivity, we have increased customer satisfaction, we have increased employee confidence. When we think about knowledge workers, we have increased work satisfaction, we have improved relationships with colleagues, we have increased productivity. So the outcomes are clear. Common outcomes of effective communication are clear at work. But again, let us think and rethink about the concept. To make our communication more effective, we need to shift from what information do I need to convey to what questions do I want my audience to ask. As I said before, this is not a passive path regards information. We need feedback from the audience. We need feedback from our listeners. So the most important thing in communication is to hear what isn't being said. And sometimes our listeners are not talking to us, are not speaking to us directly. So we have to pay attention and we have to try to understand what are they thinking. So, my dear friends, my dear colleagues, regarding communication and regarding communication in relationship and in relationships, we have 2 points of view. We have the same object, this communication. Let's imagine that communication is symbolized here by this glass of water. And we have always 2 options. We have option number 1, it's almost full. And we have option number 2, it's almost empty. So what is the option that we're going to choose, my friend? I think we should choose option number 1, almost full. Because we prepare, we gather information, we select the tools, we select the instruments, we select the platforms, we study the audience, we study what we want to say, we study the facts we want to produce. But sometimes we have a lot of challenges that we cannot control. This is why our glass is half empty. But we should focus on the positive side, always in life, at work, with our friends, with our family, always focus on the positive side. So the glass is almost full, my friends. And when we communicate, we have to think that we have gained this. We share this. We were able to convey this message. So this is a continuous project. When we are communicating, we are always creating opportunities to enrich ourselves and to be better. So again, it's almost full. So my dear friends, my dear colleagues, again, it was a great pleasure to be here. And of course, I would like to thank the very kind invitation that was made by my dear friend, Dr. Elizabeth Lucas. And I hope this small journey can help us understand the concept of communication and can help us all to create better communication opportunities for us all with our families, at work, at home, because without communication, that cannot be the creation of bonds in our society. Communication is the basis for our society. Thank you, my dear friends.